Seminar, which is devoted to an important topic. So the interaction between funders and researchers in grant competition, which is of course one core aspect of research funding. Today's paper will be presented by Marco Cavallaro from my research group, and it's all co-authored with me and with Peter Edlund from Uppsala. And we have a distinguished discussant, Walter Bloch, University of Aarhus, well-known specialist on research funding. I just want to remind a couple of rules. First, please mute yourself. Otherwise, we will do ourselves. Second, we appreciate you keep your camera open, because for the presenter, seeing smiling faces or faces with question marks on the face, it's much better than just talking to a computer screen. You can ask questions. There will be a discussion section after Marco presentation and Walter Bloch discussion. You can ask questions in the chat. You can raise your hand, or you can simply open your camera. We try to see you, but we are now 40 people in the room, so maybe if you raise your hand, it will be easier. And I want to introduce, this is the new series of RISIS seminars. You might know the RISIS project ended last year, and we are now in the step of establishing an association, and that's the first association activity. And this is in close cooperation with the European Higher Education Sector Observatory funded by the European Commission. So without further delay, I would like to give the word to Marco for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for joining. So yeah, I'm happy to present this work that we have been doing with Benedetto and Peter from Uppsala. And in a few words, it's about the interaction, the dynamics between how funders organize their grant competition and how applicants behave. So which may also lead then to a reorganization of the grant scheme by the funder. And in this paper, we are focusing on we are using the case of the European Research Council grants, so the famous ERCs. And we are, yeah, in a few words, we are focusing on project-based grants where funding agencies organize competition, and then researchers decide whether or not to submit a proposal in response to a call. There has been obviously some few literature about grant competition, for example, on how funding agencies organize competition, how notably so the grant selection processes. And there was also been literature on the consequence of competition for grants, notably on creativity, on scientific productivity, research concentration, and academic careers. And there are also been some literature on the behavior of the applicants, on what could be the factor that will push them to apply or not, how they write proposals, and how they target their applications. But what we think is missing, or at least not enough investigated so far, is how the organizing of grant competition interacts with the behavior of potential applicants, and how these behaviors can then reshape competition, pushing perhaps the funding agency to change the rules in order to make grants more attractive or even less attractive, depending on the outcomes. So yeah, it's this interaction that we are trying to study here. So for doing so, we draw on insights from the market literature. we consider grant competition as a market, in this case, with buyers, which the funding agencies, who then buy expertise from sellers, in this case, the researcher who proposed the services. And similarly to markets, so there is uncertainty. There are things that cannot be anticipated by the funding agency, such as how many applicants will apply, who applies, and this uncertainty can be sort of reduced by the funding agency, who can limit the scope of the market. They can decide who can apply, or what research is expected in cases where they define themselves the research topics. Similarly to markets, you may be familiar with the Akerlof's market for lemons, the market for cars. So there is information asymmetry, where funders mostly have proposals written by applicants to decide. And in the proposal, of course, to stand a chance, everything must be perfect, and the potential risk may also not be disclosed. Do you hear some background noise, or is that okay? Okay, I continue. And this is also why, so they have limited, well, there is this information asymmetry in the favor of the researchers who apply. And this is also why funding agency rely on the applicant's achievements or past performance that are seen in this case as a signal of the quality of the applicant. And in this kind of markets, which are, let's say, quality-based and where there is information asymmetry, there may be some different equilibria, which depend on the starting conditions that are set by the by the organizer, and also by the interaction between the buyer and the seller, the funder and the researcher. And an important process in this regard is how funders' conditions and researchers' decisions kind of adjust to each other. This is what Aspers call mutual adjustment, which notably take place in competitive environments. And the actors, in this case, they watch one another behavior, they draw conclusions, and they adapt their behavior accordingly. So if there is not enough applicants for a grant, funders, they may change the rules, they make the grant more attractive. Applicants on the other side, if they see that there is like a 1% chances of success, they might decide to avoid applying. And other key concept that we consider in this paper from the competition literature are the ones of scarcity and desirability that are defined by Aurora Johnson and colleagues as key conditions for competition to happen. So yeah, briefly, the symbolic value of a grant may be close to zero if everybody gets it. So there needs to be some level of scarcity to a certain extent, but not the object of the competition must not only be scarce but also desirable. In the case of grant, the funding condition should be deemed attractive, and in the case, especially in the case of the ERC, we found out that these are really helpful or even decisive to establish more or less stable academic careers. So we use the ERC grants as a case study. We could have used other grants, but we thought it is interesting because it's a rather unique set of grants in Europe. And additionally, there are 2 or 3 grant schemes that target a different group of researchers. So it's also interesting for us to compare how competition unfolds in those different grant schemes. And there is also, what is also interesting is this focus on breakthrough research, which is something even more difficult for the funding agency or whoever decides on the grants to evaluate ex ante, so before it happens. So there is also quite a high level of uncertainty for the funding agency. And so in this paper, we do essentially an analysis of the literature on the topic, on ERC or on grant competition. We rely also on official documents from the ERC, such as the work programs, the call documents, or annual reports. And there are also some statistics related to the ERC call that we really, it's the basis for our analysis. And Peter, one of the co-authors, even wrote a book a few years ago about the organization of the ERC and how the ERC is perceived by the research community. And we could have some insights that he collected from interviews that he did with Sweden-based applicants, which are actually a great fit to our analysis. And I will use some of the quotes when I will present the results in a few minutes. And from an analytical point of view, we do what is called process research. So we try to study how things evolve and why. And we define, as you can see on the right side, some analytical concept and observation points to guide our analysis. We just mentioned some examples for the desirability. We notably take into account the social recognition that comes with the grants. And for the scarcity, typically the success rates that are observed over the years. So we use a bracketing, what is called a bracketing strategy, where we analyze different periods. And before the start of the ERC in 2007, we investigate how the funding agency intended competition. And then from 2007 to 2022, we analyzed the interactions in the different ERC schemes and how funding conditions, how funders change funding conditions over time. So what we can say with regards to the idea behind the ERC is that it was thought in a context where the EU wanted to become more competitive in terms of groundbreaking research. And there were also several researchers who were not really satisfied with the European framework programs, which were seen perhaps as too applied or too policy oriented. Therefore, there are some key principles that are being set by the ERC. They are firstly funding frontier research, and applicants can decide on the research topic, which is called bottom-up. The grants are relatively generous for interesting number of years, and every year there will be calls that will be issued and that are published via the work programs. And the ERC started with 2 individual schemes. First, the starting grants, which is targeting earlier career researchers or also mid-career researchers who seek to establish, to start, to consolidate their independent research team. The independency, this is also something, one of the key principles of the ERC that makes them quite attractive to the research community. And the second one, the advanced grant, it's more for established scientists to give them the possibility, the funding to pursue novel research ideas. So all this sounds very attractive, and that's a problem because in the you can see here the statistic of the first ERC starting grant call. Yeah. And so something that I forgot to mention for this first call, it was initially a two-stage proposal procedure. This means that applicants could send in the first stage just a synopsis of their project idea, and then only those who were pre-selected were invited to submit a full proposal. So for the first stage, relatively little proposal writing efforts. So what happened in this first call was chaos. There were more than 9,000 applications, and the ERC, as you can see in the small red part at the bottom, could only fund 3% of them. So the success rate of 3%. And something also important, aside from the attractive conditions and the low submission efforts, it's a first call. So applicants had no idea how competitive it was. They had no information about the chances of success because it was new. So yeah, very 3% success rating. Even at that point, some said that the ERC stands for European Research Casino. And you can also see from this quote from one of Peter's interviewee, ERC recipient, by the way, just to second what I just said. So everything was very new. He or she didn't know what to expect. There is a lot of money involved and low submission efforts. Then why not? There's not much to lose if we try. So of course, this was a problem for the funding agency. Only 3% success rate. This is not really a good, good thing for a grant. So consequently, the funder did some adjustments to the starting grants. First of all, the budget increased over the years. From 2007 to 2012, as you can see, it's even more than doubled. The criteria became more explicit. The resubmissions were also restricted. For example, only those who were above the quality threshold were able to resubmit the next year. And they were also restricting and then also modifying the eligibility window. For the second cohort, they restricted it from 2 to 9 years after the PhD to 3 to 8 years after the PhD. And also important, the proposal, the application process was not, there were not two-stage proposals anymore. There is no more synopsis, so applicants had to submit directly full proposals. So in short, the funders wanted to keep the level of desirability to a high level, but provided clear signals on the chances of successes, and even set up some penalties for those who score under the quality threshold. And as you can see from this quote by another applicant, so whoever wanted to apply basically needed to think twice. Otherwise, one may get penalized, excluded for the next call, and then maybe miss important window of opportunity for their career. So the effect of these changes were quite significant, as you can see from 2007 to 2009. In the second call, there were only 2,500 applicants compared to 9,000 in 2007. And this also may be due to the deterrent effect of the first success rate, which was really 3%, a casino. And you can see then in the coming years, the green line, that the success rate in the second call, since there were less applications, it became close to 10%. And it even increased over the years until 2012, thanks to a higher budget from the ERC. And also the number, if the success rates were more attractive, the number of applicants also increased over the years. There was, however, another issues concerning the starting grant over the years, is that the eligibility window for the starting grant was commonly considered as quite wide. So people who recently got their PhD or a few years ago were competing with researchers who had more than 10 years of experience. So it was earlier career stage researchers were competing with mid-career researchers. And this was, of course, an issue. And to address this issue, the ERC in 2011 split the starting grant into two tracks according to the level of seniority. So first one for early career researcher, second one for mid-career. And eventually in 2013, the ERC finally introduced a separate scheme explicitly targeting mid-career researchers, the consolidator grants. And we will see in the next slide that this more precise targeting had a positive effect on the number of submission, which increased in both schemes, both of the schemes. You can see now the evolution until 2022 in the starting grants. And yeah, so from 2013 to now, the number of submissions, the budget, the success rate was more or less stable. The success rate was stabilized now at 10-12%. Concerning the COG, the consolidated grant for mid-career researchers, we can see in 2013, the first call, that there was a relatively high number of applicants and a 8% success rate. And then we think that this relatively low success rate led to perhaps fewer applicants in 2014, or at least maybe it has played a part in this evolution. But then we can also see that the success rates were stabilized at 12-14%, along with the number of applications per year and the budget. In the advanced grants, it's a slightly different story because applicants since the beginning, so established researchers had perhaps a more precise information on the expected profile. And there was also then a relatively stable pattern of application and success rate throughout the years. Therefore, there was not much need for adjustment by the funding agency. It was deemed that the competition worked well like this. But still, like in the other two schemes, if you look at the first and the second call, we can see some difference. In the first call, maybe the first success rate, which I think slightly above 10%, was perhaps had perhaps a deterrent effect on the number of applicants on the following year. And yeah, this is basically what I just said. If we look, also something interesting is the evolution of the budgets that were allocated to these three different funding schemes. It illustrates kind of how things did not evolve as anticipated by the funder at the very beginning. Because you can see that in the first years, up to 2012, there is as much budget for the starting grants as for the advanced grants. So like 50-50 ratio. But then since 2013 up to now, we can see that 2/3 of this budget was used for the starting grant and the consolidator grant, and the share of the advanced grant was reduced to 1/3. So in sum, we saw how the combination, especially in the first cause, of high level of desirability, low submission efforts, and also not having information about previous about chances of success led to a very high number of submissions. The funders then had to adjust their conditions and rules to push applicants to think twice before applying. Others were also not allowed to resubmit the following year, or even to even try because of the changes in the window of eligibility. But in the case of the ERC, over the years, the level of desirability remained high, as this type of grants are more and more considered as really quality benchmark in the higher education sector. Yeah, here is a figure that summarizes the links that we did throughout the presentations. Just briefly, concerning if we focus on scarcity and desirability, we saw that the grant conditions set by the funder, so the external evaluation, the social recognition that come with the grant, and the level of desirability define a pool of potential applicants. But then the level of scarcity, which is defined notably by the budget set by the funder and by the success rate. The level of scarcity, the efforts to apply, and the information on these success rates will influence the decision to apply or not in one direction or another. And then, yes, the number of proposals, there's a number of proposals that will be funded, which will in turn influence the success rate, which will then influence, again, the decision to apply. So it works a bit like a feedback loop. And if how competition unfolds is judged maybe dysfunctional by the funding agency, or not, if they're not happy with that, they can intervene and change the rules or the funding conditions, make them more or less attractive. So to conclude, one important key message from this paper is that competition not only needs initial creation, but also subsequent recreation based on how competition unfolds. And yes, so the way funders adapt their rules or conditions can be really decisive in the success of a grant scheme. And the signals of success, of chances of success, are also key to generate the effort to apply, and in the end to shape the grant market. And as further avenues for research, well, we think that the effect of these signals, information, or uncertainty on grant competition will deserve more attention. And it will also be interesting to study other grants or other grant schemes, perhaps less popular than ERC, to see also if our reasoning can be applied elsewhere. And finally, we could also define some sort of models, agent-based models, to simulate the evolution of grant funding markets based on some key parameters, such as grant conditions, submission efforts, success rates, etc. So, yeah, that's it from my side. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marco, and also for keeping very closely the time. I give immediately the word to Carter for your comments.
Sorry, I couldn't get my mouse to work. I couldn't unmute myself. Thanks a lot, Marco, for a really nice presentation and also a nice paper. I think it's a really interesting analysis, and it's an interesting perspective to look at this, looking at the interaction of funding, design, and research behavior. And I agree with you. There's a lot of things can be done here. So it's an interesting kind of thing that you're bringing up, and it has a lot of potential. Looking at different aspects, looking at things from both sides how funders design what they're doing and the criteria and everything have a lot of effects on applications and the competition and what's going on. So that's really interesting to perspective to bring out. Also, the fact that you're able to look at the dynamics over time. Looking at this, it's an interesting. I agree, it's an interesting case, both because it's a prestigious grant, but also because you're looking at it right from the start to see putting this up, looking at some of the questions of how do you do that and everything, and some of the adjustments that were made in reaction to the things. So it's a nice, interesting case. I think the analysis is it's very interesting. It's straightforward to follow. If I look at your build up to it, it's you have a lot of stuff, and to some extent, in looking through the initial parts of the paper, it was a lot of information, and I could understand it, but I was trying to figure out how should I put this together, how do I need it, and I think I would encourage you to kind of look at that and look at in terms of the actual analysis that you do, which is fairly intuitive in terms of looking at it. You have a lot of things you're talking about, equilibria and stability. You could almost get the impression that you're working up to do some sort of game theory model and something. Well, you're thinking of simulating, so maybe you are looking to go down that route later. But in terms of this paper, it's kind of more of a historical analysis, really looking at the data where you're bringing in as much information as you can on it. So I think look at that in terms of kind of matching expectations and looking at what the reader really needs to kind of do what you're going here. But I still think that this kind of this market perspective and looking at supply and demand is interesting. It's a nice way to look at it. Some factors that you could consider, you kind of bring them up is there are a lot of other factors that kind of are involved in this, in the supply demand, number of researchers. I would assume changes over time. I don't know if it does. Other instruments, obviously, another thing that's going to affect this whole dynamics is what else is out there in terms of grants. An interesting one is these follow-on national follow-up grants that kind of came in the, kind of followed this in a lot of cases were linked to it. It's kind of interesting kind of to bring that up and to note that can go both ways. I think if other opportunities for other grants would kind of maybe have a negative impact on the demand for this, but these could actually be different because getting a qualified review from the IRC could actually really improve chances to get these national grants. Be interesting to kind of note that in your discussion. I don't know if I'm not aware of if every country has kind of introduced those or if there are differences in any way. But I think it'd be good to kind of mention that because you do kind of bring up those grants anyway. Yeah, this whole thing of equilibrium and stability. I mean, you kind of show that things do kind of stabilize, but I think it'd be interesting to discuss that. In some way, you don't want to have a situation. I don't think, in terms of the whole research system, where it's the same people that are kind of applying and the same pool that are getting it. So in some way, we're kind of looking at a healthy system as being very dynamic in terms of who applies and who gets it. But I think you're really looking at this in terms of the stability, in terms of arriving at some sort of success rate that matches people's expectations. Also, in terms of looking at the whole setup, that you mentioned a little bit in your talk, so it was a little helpful, but this bracketing strategy and synthetic strategy, it wasn't completely clear to me in terms of from the paper. Well, the synthetic side, that looking at the different, noting that the types of concepts and variables you look at was really helpful. But the bracketing strategy, I had kind of trouble figuring out exactly what that was. But you kind of explained it a little bit more in your talk. One aspect I thought was interesting, I think that it'd be good to hear what you think about it, and what you know is this idea of a lottery, and because that's kind of an issue that comes up in a lot of different ways, in terms of, there's a lot of talk about, that'd be a good way to introduce lotteries, elite or partial lotteries for getting grants. It's an issue that I think it's up, and it's a question is to what extent can you interpret the data, or what can you say from the data you have on this idea that it's a lottery? Is it influencing, for example, can you say that it's influencing the quality of the applications, or is it mainly a question of the number of people that apply? Like that you've got those 9,000 applicants and the drop. Is it a fact that in the next round the quality applications are increasing, or is it just some people that are dropping out? It's an open question. I think you could argue either ways, but just look at what can you really say about that from your data. You could definitely say that increasing increasing the amount of effort that's needed is going to lead some people to drop out. But in terms of the ones that stay on, was there any difference in the quality of their application before and after? I think that's a valid question to ask, in terms of whether you can conclude what you do in terms of the changes in the quality. Also had a question for you in terms of this precise targeting, and when the split was made between the starting grants and the consolidated grants. It's interesting that both of them increased, but I also had the question: can you tell where the increases were? Because in the initial group, you've got both, right? You're both in the initial group. Do you have any information on how many of those are actually young and old? One could imagine that the whole thing is split. Suddenly, people with less experience feel that they have a better chance. That kind of gives you explanation for the starting graph. What about the consolidated? What's the story there? Is it because it's just kind of a new grant and it really attracts a lot of attention? Or can you see anything? I don't know if you're able to make that breakdown beforehand. That could be interesting to look at it, just to be kind of say it looks like both groups are increasing, but it's really not completely clear based on the data. Also, if you have any more thoughts on the difference in terms of the advanced grants, how you see the dynamics are a bit different here. You mentioned that they're more informed, but do you have any more thoughts on it? I also was wondering if we're in a period where these younger career grants are kind of more novel, that there's less opportunities out there that are kind of targeted. There are a lot out now, but I can't remember if this was really something that kind of started a trend, if that could have something to do with it. The fact that for the advanced grants, they were large grants, but they're catering to a group of researchers that typically have had much more opportunities. I don't know. Be interesting to hear your thoughts, if you can, consider more what could be the possible reasons for the difference, because you have kind of a new grant where even though they're more experienced researchers, it's also open question. Do they really know what kind of a competition is for that? But it seems like the success rates have been fairly stable from the beginning. That was all my comments. thanks again for an interesting paper and an interesting analysis.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Carter. Marco, would you like to give a set of short replies, and then we open the discussion to the whole audience?
Yeah. So yes, so this is still the paper is still work in progress. So all your suggestions and comments are really more than welcome. Yeah, I agree. Perhaps we could streamline or maybe the theoretical parts, or maybe even make better links with the results. I think we could do that. Concerning national grants that follow up that were funding ERC applications that were of high quality but not successful in the ERC scheme. Yes, we know that some of the Peter's interviewee, I think they called it consolation grants. So it has perhaps the same practical value, it's as attractive in terms of funding and the duration of the funding. But in terms of reputation or symbolic value, from what we heard from the interviewee, it didn't really compare with the ERC. And well, something that also rather timely, or perhaps not anymore, but with the case with the UK and Switzerland, which were sort of excluded from applying, well, I mean, for getting EU funding from ERC grants. So the UK and Switzerland, they said they were committed to fund all the successful ERC grants submitted with Swiss UK institutions. So same practical value, but the reputational value to be interesting to know, because I would suspect that it's not the same as having I think the ERC holds still more value, or is still considered as more valuable than a UK or Swiss alternative when applying for jobs in Europe. And yes, there are also some interesting developments also in the ERC or in other type of grants. I think it will also be interesting to see. I think the ERC started to put more emphasis now on the narratives of how applicants tell their story in order to a bit get out of these quantitative measures of metrics and make the grants perhaps more inclusive and maybe more gender balanced than it is. Yeah, concerning the lottery, I think this is also something interesting to look into. If I'm not mistaken, in the chapter of Aurora Johnson in the handbook of public funding, there is a chapter about lottery that I thought was quite interesting. I think it's also quite interesting to see because in some grants there are also anonymous applications, so the reviewers cannot really see the past performance or the past achievement of the applicants, and I think it will also be something interesting to look into in the future. Yeah, I probably forgot a lot of to answer a lot of your other comments, but this is all I noted for now. Perhaps Benedetto, as your co-author, if you want to add something.
No, thank you. I don't want to add much, except that, Carter, your first comment was perfectly right. In a way, when you open a topic which is reasonably new, because there are extremely few discussions of interaction, you elaborate a framework and you get all kinds of pieces of theory, and you are right, only some pieces are really needed for this paper. and some are openings because, for example, we are speaking with Flaminio Squazzoni because the one natural things we should do is agent-based modeling, of course, because it's the typical things you would suggest to do. And of course, being more parsimonious in the theory, so using only the theory, having only the theory in the paper which is needed and can be tested with the few data we have, would allow going more in depth on some interesting points also in the discussion. So I think that's very helpful guidance for us for revising the paper. I think, for example, the issue of lottery is interesting because there is a literature saying lottery is as efficient as peer review in allocating grants. But what comes out clearly from our data, lottery is not as efficient in giving a label of quality to the grant. So the quality of the project might be exactly the same as with the peer review, but if you don't do the peer review, the symbolic value of the grant will go lower, clearly, in what we see. So these aspects that grants have both a material dimension and a symbolic dimension allows this discussing more the lottery. So I think it's a good point for revising the paper, which we will have certainly to further revise. I would like to open the floor for discussion. We have many very expert people in the topic, both from the academia and from practice. Emanuela.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Marco and Benedetto. And I think the comments from Carter are very, very interesting and in the point. My only comment is about the fact that I think that this is more or less an exploratory paper in terms that you have to improve the data you have and to decide well how to proceed. My feeling from your presentation is that this the use of grant funding, the approach of grant funding as market is not really doable for this kind of analysis. This is my perplexity, because we are dealing with a very special funding grant, which is extremely related to the concept of selecting high quality papers, research, sorry. And there is an approximation of quality in terms of breakthrough. So it is not a vague notion of quality which can be related to the different streams only of field, but it's something which is related to the capability of the research proposed to disrupt what is the existing theory, conceptualization, and findings in order to give a new perspective on the topic that you want to analyze. And because of this, I'm not sure that the market perspective is a clear one, because there is no market failure, but the adjustments are learning processes in the policy process, because we are speaking about one of the funding instruments, most important funding instrument at least in European level. And these interactions are more related to, I repeat, adjustment which are connected to how policymakers from one side and researchers perceive the type of funding the EAR grant provides. So I would suggest to consider the possibility of a different frame, because scarcity is for sure one important thing. And of course, the effects of the quality effects on the recipients is clear, but it's a quality effect which is related also to a type of proposal which derives from a disrupting idea. And definitely I don't find, because if you adopt a market perspective, you have to also to deal with market failure and so on. And this concept cannot be easily related to this kind of competition. This is my only comment for your consideration. And thank you very much for the presentation, because the paper is interesting.
So may I just reply? In general, I would not agree that you cannot use the word market, because quality markets work exactly that way. But your comments suggest that as soon as you speak about market, it comes at a phantom of microeconomics equilibrium markets. And my tenet would be, we don't have to speak about markets, because we can speak about competition. Aurora Johnson conceptualization of competition applies also for beauty contest, for elections, etc. So you don't need to have this phantom of economists hinging on HAP. So I agree. I would just avoid the word market, which plays no role. Competition does play a role in the paper. And information asymmetry is typical of competition as well. It's not just for market, even if it's pervasive in markets. Thank you. Next comment or question or critique. I see Radim and then Zacharias. So Radim.
Hi, thank you, Marco, for the presentation. I very much enjoyed it. Sort of like the kind of thoughts I had were a little bit in the direction of what was just discussed with Emanuela. I wouldn't be so scared personally of the word market. I think it has a place, but it's interesting to see where the metaphor itself starts to fail, like as a metaphor, and when the market fails itself. And the things I'm considering is like, so in your presentation, you speak about the medium of exchange in that market being expertise, but expertise is not like money. It's possibly like unlimited resource. It's not a scarce resource. And also the agency, in my view, like more sociological point of view, is not necessarily just a buyer, but and you mentioned it in the presentation, you know, ERC had a mission, which was to promote the quality of the European research. And so what I sort of took away from your presentation is that the agency started to act as an institution in its own right, protecting its own interests against the mission, right? So you have this low effort approach that is maybe good for the European scientific landscape because it doesn't exhaust the resources of the researchers. But then the agency tries to protect itself. And maybe from the viewpoint of the agency, tightening the rules, making researchers prepare full proposals was an efficient way, but maybe it's not the most efficient way for the European research as such. So yeah, I was also like thinking like, where do you think this market metaphor fails and where the market fails as such? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there was another comment, Zacharias.
Yes, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It's a very, very key topic for science and for kind of young researchers especially. I work also as an administrator that supports applications, and we get these kind of questions constantly. Is it a fair market? Should we apply, and so forth? So my question to you, Marco, is about your conclusion and the last bullet point of your conclusions, which says that reliable signals of success chances are key to generating effort and structuring the market. And my question is this: are these signals becoming more reliable? Do you see a development of or refinement of the evaluation criteria along with the kind of next generation phases of the ERC? Does the evaluation get better as well? And if so, how? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe shortly on the first point, I think this is part of this redesign. There are aspects of the theory that are not mapped in the empirics, and there are aspects of the empirics which are not mapped in the theory, and the agency behavior is one of these, because you see clearly from the story, and it's, I think, written in the empirics, the ERC played consciously the game of getting a huge demand, because that's the way you play out your role and you protect yourself, saying, oh, we are 3% success rate, that we need much more money. If you would have the 20% success rate, you would endanger the agency. So you see strategic behavior by the agency, and that's not currently there. I think the second comment calls for digging more what is a well-functioning competition. Because again, this depends on the actors. As a researcher, a well-functioning competition is where I make an effort and it's sufficiently reliable that I know more or less what is the payoff. So a lottery with high effort is not a viable structure. So because of course, this does not mean that the quality of the selected project is good or excellent or also very good. So I think these are different concepts and should be unpacked more, because these are relevant questions. Market could be function perfectly well in terms of equilibrium, and I think this was one of the comments of Carter, but be totally dysfunctional for the original mission, of course, because this is a possible outcome. So this is probably something which needs deepening.
I ask this because Marco made this short comment about narratives and how they have come up in play. So this is kind of, it would be a very interesting thing for practitioners, especially, to have something reliable to speak about the development of competition rules and what does a reliable signal really mean here.
I think this, if I'm not mistaken, this increased focus on the narrative, those changes in the evaluation were implemented last year or will be implemented for the first time this year. And I agree that it's something interesting to look into if it makes the competition more fair in the end.
And this has to do with obvious trade-offs we know in the field. So the most reliable market is where you know in advance who will be selected based on past performance. There is no noise. So as a researcher, that's the market I would love. I can know exactly what I have to do to get the money. This tends to be a very conservative competition. Does not necessarily select breakthrough project, and the problem becomes more severe, of course, for ERCs, because they declare to be novelty based, and making a market reliable and novelty based, it's very difficult, of course. So I think these trade-offs might be elaborated more, probably based on what we see. Eric.
Yeah. I would also like to thank the presentator. The question, following up on Radim's point, I think about a part of the market analogy that would be useful to look at and find out where it sort of dissipates and disappears is the aspect that this is in a way a monopsony market, where the ERC walked into a narrative which we should remember at the time was sort of structured by this question of star researchers. But so the question, so you should integrate the idea of the monopsony, which we can watch sort of dissipate over time, because in a way the ERC is not the only funder out there, and increasingly that is the case where the funding side of the market, the supply side is changing dynamically. So I was curious about how you look at the monopsony role here, and how maintaining the percentage of success, which is basically externally set up based on how much money there is, how that is maintained when one actually is in competition on the supply side with other granting organizations. So it would be interesting, I think, not to abandon the market analogy, perhaps, but to look at those aspects where I think the most tension resides. And that's important for the research community because that sort of assembles who applies for the grants, how and how much effort they will be putting into those grants. It also structures how the demand side is set up, so younger researchers or older researchers. So just a sort of a comment from the side of the question of whether to abandon markets or follow the very good suggestion, I think, to look at how the market discussion, the market analogy falls apart. And that's basically just one last comment there, a question of how just taking the symbolic value, which you focused on a little bit, away from the question of the money. I think that's the key, the kicker here in terms of how the relationship between the ERC as a monopsony sort of supplier is associated with that question. So just a couple comments.
Thank you. I think that the topic of monopsony and competition over different funding agencies is relevant. I would tend to say this is probably not the topic on which this paper should be oriented. The case is also interesting because you might speak of competing grants, but the ERC is more unique than many other schemes. If you do the analysis of project funding in general, it's different. So I think there is a real topic about market competition in funding with competing agencies, competing bidders, but it's probably something else than it's now in the empirics, I expect. But it's an important. I see Alberto.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I have a broad comment that maybe you already said about it during the presentation, but I miss it. If you think that especially for starting grants and so young researchers, it's important to consider the dynamic of the scientific labor market that also differs, I think, a lot by discipline, in the sense that I think when young researchers get a starting grant, they increase a lot the likelihood of getting a tenure track. So application also may vary with the variation in scientific labor market. Thank you.
Thank you. This is maybe an aspect which should be better integrated because our view, it's one of the explanation exactly why the starting grant market was less stable and more difficult to manage from the competition from the ERC side, because exactly starting grants have a market value, a labor market value, which is not the case or much less the case for advanced grants because people are usually already established. So probably it's worth discussing this point. I see Radim again.
Yeah, sorry, just one more thing I've been thinking about is that to what extent could you account in this analysis also for the conditions on the side of the ERC itself? And what I mean is that the analysis so far sort of focuses on eligibility criteria and the kind of offer in terms of competitions. But I think, was it last year or maybe time flies and maybe it was already 2 years ago? But I think there have been some explicit changes, for example, for the reviewers on ERC to focus more on the proposal and less on the applicant. So these are, I imagine, also some factors that might, in the long run, affect how the equilibrium is changed or maintained.
Yeah, I fully agree. something is known from the literature. For example, the literature suggests that reviewers, after a while, started to interpret breakthrough research in a more conventional way. There are papers on that, on reviewers' behavior. I agree. Now it's much more on the rules than on the evaluation process itself, and there can be more probably on that. Also because information signals on how the evaluation occurs in reality spread out in the community. Maybe they are not on the website of the ESC, but people share reviews, peers or evaluators are in the community and the information circulates. So this is probably an important signal to know how things work really in the competition beyond the rules. So thank you. Other questions or comments or critiques? If not, I would like to thank you. If somebody has still something to comment. Otherwise, I would like really to thank you. There are a lot of values in the suggestions, and especially on this way of deepening more aspects which we can analyze empirically, and be more parsimonious in the theory, which means that maybe we have theory for writing all the papers, which is the good news in a long-term perspective. All that said, I thank Serena, who shows up the call for the next RISIS Research Seminars, 14th of February. It will be on European Union framework programs, attractiveness to funding, and especially on an analysis at the regional level, so where the regions converge or diverge in the ability to attract European funding. And then in the chat, you find the link for the registration and also for the author seminar, the one on academic seniority and scientific production, which will be in March, and a seminar on analysis of mission statement of universities, combining data with topic modeling analysis, which will take place later in April. So we really welcome you to the next and following seminars. I would like to say we are also open to proposals to present work, especially work like was presented today, where the papers are just on their journey, and then participants or presenters could get useful feedback. So if you have any papers you find fits into the format of the seminars, please contact me, and we will get in touch to find a slot. If there are no further comments or questions, I wish you a pleasant afternoon. Thanking again Carter, Marco, and then Serena and Georg for the organization.
Great, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really useful feedback. Thanks a lot. And great debates on the use of market as a metaphor. Thank you very much.